In the summer of 1998, the pristine lakes and rivers of northern Minnesota were experiencing one of their most popular recreation seasons in years. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, with its interconnected waterways and dense forests, attracted thousands of visitors seeking the tranquility and adventure that only untouched wilderness could provide. Among the most enthusiastic were local families who had grown up with canoeing as a fundamental part of their summer traditions. The Hendrickson family from Duluth epitomized this deep connection to Minnesota's water country. For 3 generations, they had owned a modest cabin on the shores of Burnside Lake, using it as a base for canoe trips that ranged from afternoon paddles to week-long expeditions into the most remote areas of the wilderness. The family's love for canoeing had been passed down from grandfather to father to sons, creating bonds that were strengthened by countless hours spent navigating the region's challenging and beautiful waterways. Michael James Hendrickson, 17, and his younger brother Christopher David, 15, had been canoeing since they could barely hold a paddle. Their father, Robert Hendrickson, was a high school mathematics teacher who used summer vacations to share his passion for wilderness canoeing with his sons. Their mother, Linda, worked as a nurse at St. Mary's Medical Center in Duluth but took every available opportunity to join the family's outdoor adventures. Michael, known to friends and family as Mike, was entering his senior year at Duluth East High School, where he maintained a solid B average while participating in cross-country running and the school's environmental club. His teachers described him as a responsible and mature teenager who often took leadership roles in group projects and outdoor activities. Mike had developed into an accomplished canoeist, capable of handling challenging rapids and long-distance portages with the skill of someone much older. Christopher, called Chris by everyone who knew him, was beginning his sophomore year at the same school. While younger and less experienced than his brother, Chris possessed a natural athletic ability that made him an excellent canoeing partner. He was more spontaneous and adventurous than Mike, often encouraging his older brother to explore new routes and attempt more challenging passages during their trips. The brothers' relationship was characterized by the typical mixture of competition and cooperation found between siblings close in age. They could argue intensely about navigation decisions or campsite choices, but they worked together seamlessly when facing the physical challenges of wilderness canoeing. Friends who had paddled with them described their teamwork as impressive, noting how they could coordinate their efforts without verbal communication during difficult maneuvers. Their daily routine during summer canoe trips followed patterns established over years of family expeditions. They would wake early, break camp efficiently, and spend long days paddling while exploring lakes and rivers that captured their interest. Both boys were comfortable spending weeks in the wilderness, carrying all necessary equipment and food while navigating by map and compass through waterways that offered few landmarks for inexperienced travelers. The brothers' relationship with technology reflected the transitional period of the late 1990s. They carried no cell phones, GPS devices, or emergency beacons, relying instead on traditional navigation methods and wilderness survival skills learned from their father and grandfather. Communication with the outside world required reaching ranger stations or lodges with telephone access, which could be days away depending on their location. Mike's leadership qualities extended to his role as the more cautious and methodical of the two brothers. He typically took responsibility for route planning, studying topographical maps and consulting guidebooks to identify potential challenges and interesting destinations. His approach to wilderness travel emphasized safety and preparation, reflecting lessons learned from years of family instruction about respecting the power and unpredictability of wilderness environments. Chris, while respecting his brother's planning and leadership, brought enthusiasm and physical strength that complemented Mike's more analytical approach. He was often the first to volunteer for difficult portages or challenging paddle routes, and his optimistic nature helped maintain morale during long days of strenuous travel. The combination of Mike's caution and Chris's boldness made them an effective team for tackling ambitious canoeing objectives. The brothers' equipment reflected both their families' long experience and their own developing preferences as serious canoeists. They paddled a 17-foot Kevlar canoe that their father had purchased specifically for extended wilderness trips, appreciating its combination of durability and lightweight for portaging. Their camping gear was high quality but not excessive, chosen for reliability and packability rather than luxury or convenience. Their wilderness skills had been developed through formal training as well as practical experience gained during years of family trips. Both boys had completed Red Cross lifeguard certification, wilderness first aid courses, and canoeing instruction offered by local outdoor education organizations. They understood how to read water conditions, recognize weather patterns, and respond appropriately to the various challenges that wilderness canoeing could present. The broader context of their canoeing experience included participation in local paddling clubs and youth outdoor programs that emphasized both skill development and environmental stewardship. Both brothers were active in conservation efforts, participating in lake cleanup activities, and supporting organizations dedicated to protecting the Boundary Waters area from development and pollution threats. If you enjoy real mysteries like this one, please subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any cases. On the morning of July 23, 1998, Mike and Chris Hendrickson loaded their canoe with supplies for what they planned to be a 4-day solo expedition into a remote section of the Boundary Waters that they had never previously explored. Their destination was a chain of smaller lakes accessible through a series of portages from their family's cabin on Burnside Lake, an area their father had recommended as offering excellent fishing and scenic camping opportunities. The specific route the brothers had chosen required several challenging portages and navigation through waterways that were less frequently traveled by casual canoeists. They had studied the area extensively using topographical maps and guidebooks, planning a circular route that would allow them to explore multiple lakes while returning to their starting point within their planned time frame. Their parents were visiting Linda's sister in Minneapolis during the boys' planned expedition, but had given permission for the trip based on their confidence in their son's canoeing abilities and wilderness experience. The brothers had been making solo trips for 2 summers, always returning safely and with stories of successful adventures that demonstrated their growing competence as independent wilderness travelers. Mike and Chris had left detailed route plans with neighbors at the family cabin, indicating their intended campsites and expected return date of July 27th. Their plan included specific lakes where they intended to camp each night, along with alternative routes they might choose if weather conditions or other factors required modifications to their original itinerary. The weather forecast for their departure had been favorable, calling for partly cloudy skies with moderate temperatures and light winds that would provide ideal canoeing conditions. The brothers had checked multiple weather sources and were confident that no severe weather systems were expected to affect their planned route during their time in the wilderness. Early morning conditions on July 23rd appeared perfect for beginning their expedition. The lake was calm, with light mist rising from the water that created the ethereal atmosphere that made early morning paddling so appealing to experienced canoeists. Neighbors at nearby cabins remembered seeing the brothers loading their canoe and appearing excited about their planned adventure. The last confirmed sighting of Mike and Chris occurred around 8:30 in the morning, when they were seen paddling across Burnside Lake toward the portage that would take them into the wilderness area. A retired couple from a neighboring cabin waved to the brothers as they passed, noting that they appeared to be making good time and seemed well prepared for their expedition. The brothers' planned route would have taken them through Crab Lake, then via portage to Nicky Lake, and subsequently through a series of smaller, interconnected waterways that would eventually loop back toward their starting point. The route was ambitious, but not beyond their capabilities, requiring approximately 15 miles of paddling and several portages totaling about 3 miles of overland travel. After that final sighting on Burnside Lake, Mike and Chris Hendrickson effectively disappeared from the historical record, beginning a mystery that would consume their family and community for the next 20 years. When the brothers failed to return to the family cabin by the evening of July 27th, the neighbors who had been monitoring their absence initially assumed they had decided to extend their trip by a day or had been delayed by weather or other minor complications. It was not uncommon for experienced canoeists to modify their plans based on conditions encountered during their trips. However, by the morning of July 28th, concern began to mount among the neighbors and family friends who knew the brothers' reliable nature and their commitment to following planned schedules. Mike and Chris had never been late returning from previous expeditions without finding a way to communicate their changed plans, and their failure to appear raised immediate red flags for people familiar with their responsible approach to wilderness travel. The neighbors contacted Robert and Linda Hendrickson in Minneapolis, who immediately drove north to coordinate search efforts. The parents' concern was immediate and intense, as they knew their sons would never deviate significantly from their stated plans without compelling reasons and would never fail to return on schedule without communication. Initial search efforts began on July 29th, coordinated by the Lake County Sheriff's Office in cooperation with Forest Service personnel and volunteer search and rescue organizations familiar with the Boundary Waters area. The search focused on the brothers' planned route, with teams checking each of the lakes and portages indicated in their detailed itinerary. Search teams faced significant challenges due to the remote location and the vast network of interconnected waterways that comprise the brothers' planned route. The Boundary Waters area encompassed thousands of acres of wilderness, with numerous alternative routes and side trips that experienced canoeists might choose if they encountered interesting opportunities or challenging conditions. The search effort was complicated by the area's popularity during peak summer season, which meant that evidence of the brothers' passage might be difficult to distinguish from signs left by other canoeists who had used the same routes and campsites. Search teams had to carefully examine each potential clue to determine whether it might be connected to the missing teenagers. Weather conditions during the initial search period were generally favorable, but afternoon thunderstorms common in the region created periods when air search efforts had to be suspended and water-based searching became more dangerous. The same storm systems also raised concerns about the brothers' safety if they were stranded somewhere without adequate shelter. After 3 days of intensive searching involving over 40 volunteers, search teams discovered the brothers' first campsite on Crab Lake, exactly where their itinerary had indicated they planned to spend their first night. The campsite showed clear evidence of organized setup and use, with a fire ring containing cold ashes and minor debris that suggested the brothers had camped there successfully. The discovery of the campsite provided both reassurance and additional concern for search coordinators. The evidence confirmed that Mike and Chris had successfully reached their first planned destination and had followed their intended route that far, but it also indicated they had continued deeper into the wilderness where searching would become more difficult and time-consuming. Search efforts expanded to focus on the next portion of the brothers' planned route, examining the portage between Crab Lake and Nikki Lake, and searching the shorelines of Nikki Lake for signs of their second campsite. This phase of the search required more specialized personnel, as the terrain became more challenging and the potential search area expanded significantly. On August 2nd, search teams made a discovery that would deepen the mystery and concern surrounding the brothers' disappearance. At the portage between Crab Lake and Nikki Lake, searchers found what appeared to be drag marks leading from the normal canoe landing area into the forest, along with disturbed ground that suggested some kind of struggle or emergency had occurred at that location. More disturbing was the discovery of personal items scattered near the portage landing, including a water bottle that the brothers' parents confirmed belonged to Chris, and a torn piece of fabric that appeared to match clothing descriptions provided by the family. The items were found in locations that suggested they had been dropped or lost during some kind of disturbance, rather than through normal camping activities. The discovery transformed the search from a rescue operation focused on finding lost canoeists to a potential criminal investigation. Law enforcement specialists trained in crime scene analysis were brought in to examine the portage area for additional evidence that might explain what had happened to Mike and Chris at that location. Forensic examination of the portage site revealed additional troubling details. The drag marks appeared to lead from the water's edge approximately 50 yards into the forest, before disappearing in an area of rocky ground that would not retain clear tracks. The pattern of disturbed vegetation suggested that something heavy had been pulled through the area, possibly including the brothers' canoe and equipment. However, despite extensive searching of the forest area beyond the drag marks, investigators found no trace of the brothers' canoe, camping equipment, or any additional personal items. The absence of their gear was particularly puzzling, as the 17-foot Kevlar canoe would have been difficult to move far from the portage area without leaving additional evidence of its passage. The investigation expanded to include interviews with other canoeists who had been in the area during the relevant time period, though the remote location meant that potential witnesses were limited. Several groups reported seeing a canoe matching the brothers' description during the days before their disappearance, but no one reported witnessing any unusual incidents or concerning behavior. Search efforts continued for 2 more weeks, involving specialized dive teams that examined deeper areas of the lakes along the brothers' route and expanded ground searches that covered potential alternative routes they might have chosen. The Minnesota State Patrol provided helicopter support when weather conditions permitted, allowing for aerial reconnaissance of areas that were difficult to reach by ground or water. Despite these intensive efforts, no additional evidence of the brothers' fate was discovered. The case gradually transitioned from an active search and rescue operation to a missing persons investigation that would remain open but receive minimal active resources as months passed without new developments. The Hendrickson family never accepted that their sons had simply vanished without explanation. Robert and Linda maintained contact with law enforcement agencies, organized annual volunteer search efforts, and worked with missing persons organizations to keep their case in the public eye. They refused to believe that Mike and Chris could disappear so completely in an area where they were experienced and knowledgeable. The case attracted significant attention from the canoeing community throughout Minnesota and neighboring states, as the brothers' disappearance highlighted the potential dangers faced by even experienced wilderness travelers. Canoe outfitters and guide services began incorporating their story into safety briefings, emphasizing the importance of emergency communication and the unpredictability of wilderness conditions. Over the following years, the investigation generated numerous theories about what might have happened to Mike and Chris. Some law enforcement officials suspected they had encountered criminals who were using the remote wilderness area for illegal activities, possibly drug manufacturing or smuggling operations that required secluded locations away from law enforcement surveillance. Other investigators theorized that the brothers had suffered some kind of canoeing accident that had resulted in their deaths, with their bodies and equipment being swept into deeper water or remote areas where they could not be easily discovered. The interconnected nature of the region's waterways meant that evidence could potentially travel great distances from the original incident location. Environmental factors were also considered as potential explanations for the brothers' disappearance. Sudden weather changes could create dangerous conditions on the lakes, and even experienced canoeists could find themselves in life-threatening situations if caught in severe storms without adequate shelter, or if their canoe was damaged in rough water. The psychological impact of the unsolved case on the Hendrickson family was devastating and long-lasting. Robert and Linda struggled with not knowing whether their sons were alive or dead, holding on to hope while simultaneously grieving their loss. The uncertainty made it impossible to achieve closure and move forward with their lives in any meaningful way. The family's annual search efforts became community events that brought together volunteers from throughout northern Minnesota. These gatherings served both as memorial services for Mike and Chris and as opportunities to conduct additional searches of areas that had not been thoroughly examined during the original investigation. Local media coverage of the anniversary searches helped maintain public awareness of the case and occasionally generated new tips or potential leads that investigators would follow up. However, none of these leads produced concrete evidence that advanced understanding of what had happened to the brothers during their final expedition. In 2005, 7 years after the brothers' disappearance, the discovery of human remains in a remote area of the Boundary Waters briefly raised hopes that the case might finally be resolved. However, forensic analysis determined that the remains belonged to a solo canoeist who had disappeared in the 1970s, providing closure for another family, but deepening the mystery surrounding Mike and Chris. Advanced search technologies that became available in the early 2000s were periodically applied to the case, including underwater sonar equipment that could detect objects on lake bottoms and GPS mapping systems that allowed for more systematic coverage of potential search areas. These efforts, while more sophisticated than the original search, failed to uncover any additional evidence or clues. The case became part of training programs for wilderness search and rescue organizations, illustrating the challenges of conducting investigations in remote areas where evidence could be widely scattered or hidden by environmental factors. The brothers' story was frequently cited as an example of how quickly experienced outdoors people could vanish, even in familiar territory. In 2018, 20 years after Mike and Chris Hendrickson's disappearance, a discovery would finally provide concrete evidence of their fate, though it would raise as many questions as it answered about their final day in the wilderness. Thomas Anderson, a local fishing guide who had been working the Boundary Waters area for over 30 years, was checking his favorite spots on a small, unnamed lake approximately 10 miles from the brothers' planned route, when he noticed something unusual tangled in the root system of a large white pine that had fallen into the water decades earlier. What caught Anderson's attention were brightly colored pieces of fabric that appeared to be synthetic material rather than natural debris. Using a long-handled net, he carefully extracted what proved to be 2 life jackets that had become thoroughly entangled in the underwater root system, apparently trapped there for many years based on their condition and the way vegetation had grown around them. The life jackets were immediately recognizable as the type used by serious canoeists in the 1990s, and their size and condition suggested they had belonged to teenagers. More significantly, one of the jackets contained a waterproof name tag that clearly identified it as belonging to Michael Hendrickson, providing the first concrete evidence of the brothers' fate in 2 decades. Anderson, aware of the missing brothers' case through his long involvement in the local outdoors community, immediately contacted authorities rather than disturbing any additional evidence that might be present in the area. Within hours, dive teams and forensic specialists had arrived to conduct a comprehensive examination of the lake and the surrounding root system where the life jackets had been discovered. The underwater investigation revealed additional evidence that confirmed both brothers had been in the area where their life jackets were found. Divers discovered personal items, including a waterproof watch that belonged to Chris, fishing tackle that matched equipment the brothers were known to carry, and fragments of camping gear that had been trapped in the same root system for many years. More significantly, the dive team discovered human remains that were later identified through dental records as belonging to both Mike and Chris Hendrickson. The remains were found in different areas of the small lake, suggesting that the brothers had become separated after whatever incident had brought them to this remote location far from their planned route. The discovery location raised profound questions about how the brothers had reached an area that was not part of their intended itinerary, and was accessible only through routes that would have required significant deviation from their planned path. The lake where they were found was connected to their original route through a series of smaller waterways and difficult portages that experienced canoeists might attempt, but that represented much more challenging travel than their stated plans had indicated. Forensic examination of the scene and the recovered evidence suggested that Mike and Chris had reached the remote lake and had been in the water when they died, but the specific circumstances that led to their deaths could not be definitively determined after 20 years of submersion and environmental exposure. The condition and location of the life jackets provided important clues about the brothers' final hours. Both jackets showed evidence of having been worn when the brothers entered the water, but they had apparently become detached either during a struggle to survive or after death, when decomposition allowed them to float free and become trapped in the root system. Analysis of the lake bottom where the remains were discovered revealed no evidence of their canoe or other major equipment, suggesting that these items had either been swept into connecting waterways or had been removed from the scene by unknown parties. The absence of the canoe was particularly significant, as its discovery would have provided important evidence about what had caused the brothers to end up in the water. Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic pathologist who specialized in cases involving submersion and drowning, provided expert analysis of the evidence recovered from the lake. Her examination suggested that both brothers had died by drowning, but the specific circumstances that led to their entering the water remained unclear due to the passage of time and environmental factors. The evidence is consistent with a canoeing accident that resulted in both individuals ending up in the water, Dr. Williams explained to investigators. However, the remote location and the deviation from their planned route suggest that other factors may have contributed to the circumstances that led to their deaths. The investigation team developed several theories about what might have led Mike and Chris to the remote lake where they were eventually discovered. One possibility was that they had encountered other people in the wilderness who had directed them to the location, either with good intentions or as part of some criminal activity that had resulted in their deaths. Another theory suggested that the brothers had chosen to explore the area on their own, attracted by fishing opportunities or scenic camping possibilities that they had learned about from other canoeists or guidebooks. This explanation would be consistent with their adventurous nature and their willingness to modify planned routes when interesting opportunities presented themselves. Environmental factors were also considered as potential explanations for the brothers' presence in the remote location. Severe weather could have forced them to seek shelter or take alternative routes that led them away from their planned path, ultimately bringing them to the area where they encountered whatever circumstances led to their deaths. The recovery of the brothers' remains allowed for definitive closure of the case, though many questions about their final day remained unanswered. The Lake County Sheriff's Office officially concluded that Mike and Chris had died in a drowning accident, but acknowledged that the specific circumstances leading to their deaths could not be determined with certainty. For Robert and Linda Hendrickson, the discovery provided the closure they had sought for 20 years, finally confirming that their sons had not survived their final canoeing expedition. While the knowledge was devastating, it allowed them to properly grieve their loss and begin the process of moving forward with their lives after 2 decades of uncertainty. The family chose to have Mike and Chris buried together in a cemetery overlooking Lake Superior, with their grave marker including an engraved image of a canoe to commemorate their shared passion for wilderness paddling. The funeral service attracted hundreds of people from the canoeing community who had been touched by their story and had participated in search efforts over the years. The case became an important part of wilderness safety education programs throughout Minnesota and the broader Great Lakes region. the brothers' story illustrated how even experienced canoeists could find themselves in life-threatening situations when they deviated from planned routes or encountered unexpected challenges in remote areas. Canoe outfitters and guide services incorporated lessons from Mike and Chris's case into their safety briefings and equipment recommendations. New emphasis was placed on the importance of emergency communication devices, detailed trip planning, and the dangers of exploring unfamiliar areas without adequate preparation and backup support. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources developed new safety protocols for wilderness areas that included improved signage at portage locations and enhanced communication systems at popular camping areas. These improvements were designed to help canoeists stay oriented and maintain contact with emergency services when necessary. Modern canoeing safety practices have evolved significantly since 1998, with GPS devices, satellite communicators, and waterproof cell phone cases becoming standard equipment for serious wilderness paddlers. However, the basic challenges of navigating remote waterways and dealing with emergency situations remain the same, and the brothers' story continues to serve as a reminder about respecting the power and unpredictability of wilderness environments. The Hendrickson family established a memorial fund at the University of Minnesota Duluth to support outdoor education programs and wilderness safety research. The fund has provided scholarships for students pursuing careers in natural resource management and has supported research into improving search and rescue techniques in wilderness areas. The small lake where Mike and Chris were eventually discovered has become an unofficial memorial site, visited by canoeists who learn about their story and want to pay their respects. The Minnesota Department of Natural Resources discourages visitors from seeking out the specific location, both for safety reasons and to preserve the dignity of the site, but the area continues to serve as a symbol of the risks inherent in wilderness travel. The case also highlights the importance of persistence in missing persons investigations, demonstrating how evidence can remain hidden for decades before being discovered by chance. The recovery of the brothers' life jackets 20 years after their disappearance shows that answers sometimes exist long after active searching has ended, waiting for the right combination of circumstances to bring them to light. Today, the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness continues to attract thousands of paddlers each year who seek the same wilderness experience that drew Mike and Chris Hendrickson in 1998. Their story serves as both an inspiration for those who love wilderness canoeing and a sobering reminder that even experienced outdoors people must respect the challenges and dangers inherent in remote wilderness travel. The love of wilderness paddling that Mike and Chris shared with their family continues to inspire new generations of canoeists who discover the beauty and challenge of Minnesota's pristine waterways. Their story has become part of the enduring legacy of the Boundary Waters area, reminding visitors that the wilderness demands both respect and careful preparation from those who venture into its remote and beautiful places. In the end, Mike and Chris Hendrickson found their final resting place in the wilderness they had loved since childhood, their story becoming part of the cautionary folklore that helps keep other wilderness travelers safe while pursuing the adventures that make life meaningful and memorable.